And I want to go down that path here because there's some I think some connecting of the dots that needs to be done here for a lot of the American audience, and really for the Washington audience, quite frankly, in that there is this belief that what Putin said last Friday about how he would consider the use of long-range weapons manned and operated by the West would be a direct intervention and would be a state of war, basically. And then he would take appropriate countermeasures, which many of his officials were echoed after that. And there's many in the West who said he'll never do it. There's no way. It's just a bunch of bluff. He's trying to prevent us from just doing what we're going to do, but he won't. But now I'm going to ask you, put yourself in the Russian position for a minute. And you just saw the National Security Advisor for the United States admit that there is critical low stockpiles worldwide for our interceptor missiles. You saw the Secretary of Defense say that we don't even have enough of the long-range missiles to give to Ukraine, much less to use on our own. And then you also have this a lot of people have forgotten about this, but Gary, if you can throw up that 5% figure, one of the senior NATO officials, I believe it was a few months back, said we only have 5% of the air defenses needed to protect our flank. So if you're the Russians, are you really going to bluff if you see that the capacity to wage war on the NATO side is this low?
I think we have to go back and look carefully at the calculus that I think President Putin considers carefully every day. First of all, neither he nor the Chinese nor the Iranians nor anybody else I can find in the Middle East is interested in a war. We're the ones that have resorted to the use of military power to bully our opponents into submission. We are doing it through our proxies, the proxy in Ukraine and the proxy in Israel. I think we've exhausted this capability, but we're continuing to push it on the assumption that we will not be challenged. And as you point out, I think that's a very dangerous approach because the Russian patience, and I think the patience everywhere across Eurasia with our behavior and our policies is at an end. So I think it's very possible that we could shower NATO with hypersonic missiles that we know we can't shoot down. I don't care how many Patriots they ship over there, they're not going to shoot them down. And as a result, we could see tremendous losses. Now, what do we do at that point? Do we react and say, well, we're going to use nuclear weapons? Well, if you do, that's Armageddon. No one will survive. You can't fight and win a nuclear war. That's nonsense. The Russians understand it. The Chinese understand it. I think there are people in Washington who do understand it, but you have a problem. You have people with no personal experience of war who think it is possible. They need to be removed from office as quickly as possible. I think we know some of them sit in the Senate, and undoubtedly there are some in the Department of Defense. We've got to rein this thing in. No one seems to be willing to do it. No one seems to be in charge. You cannot convince me that President Biden is really cognizant of any of this. I don't think he's in charge. The question is, who is in charge? There is no strategy. There has never been a strategy. Harming Russia is not a strategy. That's a wish. It has no strategic foundation. You're dealing with people on the other side who are strategic thinkers, and they are asking themselves, what do we want this world to look like when this war ends? President Putin and Xi want to do business with the West. They don't want perpetual war and conflict. They want to compete with us. BRICS is all about competition with us. And people have walked away from us because we're destructive, because we've opted for military power again and again instead of negotiations, diplomacy, and economic development. Now, that's where we are. The question is, how far are we going to be pushed before it becomes patently obvious that we're finished and we can't go any further?
Well, and
no one in Washington wants to admit anything.
No, they don't. There are no limits. Yeah, I mean, we've shown a number of times how you had Biden say, we're the most powerful nation on the history of the world. That's one, but there's a bunch of them, and it's just kind of a common theme. We're their indispensable nation. We govern the world, and the world needs us. I mean, they believe some of this stuff, but the rest of the world doesn't. So here's the problem. Anytime you're talking about this issue here, especially with the potential between NATO and Russia, nothing exists in a vacuum. It's all connected to other things, and that's already happening. Here just a couple of days ago, Russia and China had the largest naval drills since the Soviet Union times, when they had over 400 ships of various types that were involved with this, and 90,000 personnel in the Sea of Japan. I think that's actually still going on as we speak here. And then also there's been an increase in air air closing to U.S. Territory near the Aleutian Islands. And General Ryder was asked recently about that. Watch his answer.
There's been, I think, up to 28 different incursions by Russian and Chinese aircraft around Alaska in the last several weeks. What is going on from your point of view?
Well, as I think you heard my colleague Sabrina mention yesterday, I mean, we're certainly aware of that. To my knowledge, those aircraft did not enter into U.S. airspace. And it's not the first time that we've seen the Russians and the Chinese flying, in the vicinity. And that's something that we obviously closely monitor. And it's also something that we're prepared to respond to. But in this particular case, it did not pose a threat to U.S. national security. And I'd refer you to the Russians in terms of why they feel compelled to want to look at the United States a little bit closer.
But the numbers are certainly on the rise. There's been many more incursions than over past years.
In terms of why those numbers are what they are, again, I'd refer you to them.
I'd refer you to them. What is your assessment of why Russia and China would be choosing this time to increase their patrols? I know a lot of this happened in the Cold War, but it hasn't since. Why now?
Well, remember, we've talked about this before, about the capacity of the Russians to horizontally escalate. In other words, you do something to us in northern Russia or southern Russia, whether it's Ukraine, White Russia, or somewhere else, we can act in the Pacific. In other words, we have the capacity to make life miserable for you. We can cause you to stretch your resources to the breaking point. I think that's really what this is all about, because, again, they're not interested in a war with us. That's the last thing in the world that they want. And we know that. We know that because we have intercepts that tell us that. Are there hotheads on the other side? Of course, you have hotheads in Moscow. You've got some hotheads in Beijing. But the people who govern, the people that control the power in those states, are completely disinterested in a war with the United States and NATO. So this is another exercise in trying to signal us in a rather straightforward manner that if you really want this, you're going to end up in a global conflict. And that, of course, has been the warning that people like Professor Mearsheimer and RFK Jr. and many others have sounded repeatedly, that what starts in one area can rapidly spread and engulf the whole world. We have no interest in this. The American people have no interest in this. This is a rogue element in Washington that is taking us down a road that we would never support. But when is the last time that anybody debated these things in the Senate or the House? When's the last time that anybody asked for a declaration of war? Instead, we get these authorizations for the use of force, which are open-ended and drag on in perpetuity. The American people haven't paid attention. They're comfortable. Well, they're about to become very uncomfortable if we proceed down this road any